morning to everybody. I hope you're able to hear me. It is such a privilege and an honor to be able to come to see you today, to visit with you through the internet, to touch base with you, to step actually into your life, into your screen, onto your computer, into your television if need be, wherever and whatever technology that you are receiving this through. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to come into your life. We have so much to talk about. We have so many beautiful things to discuss. Dear friends, what a parsha, what a section of the Torah that gives us so much insight and so much wisdom, and yet stuns us, breaks us, awakens us to the beauty of love. I call this, in my own personal life, in my own family, I call this parsha the parsha of being forgiven much in order that we may love much. We'll talk about that in some detail, but if you're joining with us, please let us know you're here. Let us know who you are and what town or village or country you're coming from, and any prayer requests, any comments, any questions you may have, put them in the comment box, and we'll be happy to address those. And just a joy to see them, to see you, and to be here with you today. Okay, so we're going to talk about Parsha Tisa. That is Exodus chapter 30, verse 11, through chapter 34, verse 35. And of course, this includes a series of things. This is a fairly long Parsha, a very significant Parsha, the 21st week of the Torah session. The third seven, the cycles of the sevens apply, and the power of the sevens apply even in the Torah readings that we do according to the annual schedule. So this is the third seven, and so we should expect there will be a culmination of things, a very important set of things in this particular parsha. And of course, there is. This is the parsha of the golden calf. This is the parsha of the cleft of the rock. This is the parsha of the Midot Harachamim, or the 13 attributes of mercy and compassion that the Holy One expresses, and as he describes himself as to who he really is and reintroduces himself to mankind this week. This is the parsha of the broken tablets, but it's also the parsha of the new, freshly inscribed tablets, the most precious love gift that a bridegroom king could give to his bride select, his bride candidate. And that would be the Bnei Israel and all those who associate with the Holy One through Bnei Israel and the revelation that comes to them. So we have this, and we also have this is also the parsha of the shining face, the radiating of the energy, of the Kedusha energy that comes through not just having the words of the Holy One, but having a revelation of who he is and what his character is, and how wonderfully forgiving and merciful and compassionate and faithful to covenant that he is. These are the things that causes the face to glow. Moshe will be the example. He'll be the pattern. Yeshua, the Messiah, will indeed be an example of that whenever he comes down from the Mount of Transfiguration. He will also have his face shining in that regard and radiating energy in that regard. And so is it to be with each of us, to some level, to some degree, as we walk through this process to him. The more we are with him, the more we know his words, but not only his words, also the character and the nature of who he is, and the power and the gentleness, but yet the goodness of who he is. That will bring us the shining of the face. May your faces shine. May his light and his countenance be upon you. Amen. This is the third installment of what I call the Beauty Realm Download. I try to help you understand the sequential nature of the Torah, the way it's a story that's unfolding before our eyes, and we're supposed to be caught up in the story and return to that great swelling adventure every year. Well, we're joining the story in progress, and this is the third portion of what I call the Beauty Realm Download aspect of it. Beginning in chapter 25 of Exodus, the Holy One began to tell us what his plans were. And he began to say, you're going to need to understand how things look in my world, because we're going to join worlds. We're going to combine worlds, and I'm going to be in your world, and you're going to be in my world, and we're going to realm travel together in order that we may bring about this grand redemptive plan. the redemption of humankind as a species, bloodline by bloodline, and household by household. And then also the plan for the restoration of all of creation, mountaintop to valley, from continent to continent, ocean to ocean, landmass to landmass, to the original intended Edenic state that is full of beauty and full of fruitfulness and full of harmonious interactions and shalom. Now that's what he did in chapter 25. He began to tell us, now here's what my world looks like. Here's what my courts look like. Here's what my throne room looks like. Here's what my throne looks like. Here's what it looks like when I'm on my throne. And here's what the courts and the chambers of the king look like. Now reproduce this on earth. He began to tell us that in chapter 25. I call it the Mishkan Discourse, because Mishkan means the continual dwelling, the place of continual dwelling in particular. The Mishkan Discourse. The Holy One is talking in his own language, his own tongue, his own words about what his world looks like and what he wants us to reproduce on earth in real time, in real ways. So this is the third part. We've had 2 installments. We had Terumah was the beginning parsha on this subject. Then we followed that with Tetzaveh, which was last week. And then this is the third part, Tisa, the third element. It's all related. This is all part of a continuing story, and actually it will continue through the building process of Vayekel and Pekudei, and then all the way into the book of Leviticus. That will take place soon. But we're in the throes of this great adventure, this great story, and the Holy One is trying to prepare us for something fantastic. Back whenever Joseph was still alive, Joseph kept saying something. He said it twice. He probably said it more than that, but we have it recorded twice. Joseph told his brothers while they were in Egypt, while they were recovering from the famine, and yet they're going into exile, he told them, he says, the Holy One will surely visit you. The word was pakad. He's going to come. He's going to muster you. He's going to call you together. He's going to assemble you. He's going to inspect you. He's going to prepare you. He's going to do something with you. Well, that pakad is more than just the redemption from the slavery. That pakad is what took place at Sinai and is going to take place through the tabernacle. This pakading, this idea of bringing forth visitation, muster, and that visitation is going to become a permanent event, and that's through the tabernacle, the Mishkan. So this is part 3 of the Beauty Realm download, and I give a subtitle in this parsha of Can Flesh and Blood Humans Really Share Space with a Holy God? Let me just repeat that to you so you can catch the drift of where we're going with this. The Beauty Realm download part 3, the subject matter of it is, can flesh and blood humans really share space with a holy God? Well, the answer is going to be yes. But the answer is not going to come an easy yes. It will be a yes with conditions, with circumstances, with understandings, with cooperations. So here we are in episode 9 of the B'nai Israel Chronicles, the larger story of the book of Exodus, the story of the building of a great nation that the Holy One has promised. So this is all part of that story as well. The Mishkan Discourse, the Beauty Realm download is all part of the B'nai Israel Chronicles, part of our calling to be a great nation. And this section of the narrative is about how we become functional in Kedusha, in trafficking in holiness, in trafficking in the energy of the King's holiness and the beauty and the majesty of his persona and the wonder and the wisdom of his words, all those things functional in Kedusha on earth as we can be in the heavenly realms, as it is in heaven and as we can be whenever we enter into and absorb the energy of the holiness realms in the Mishkan. So being made functional in Kedusha, even though, this is the wonder of it all, this is the shocking part of it all, being functional in kingdom, heavenly Kedusha, even though we live in a fleshly body and are deployed in a dysfunctional and very perverse world. Can we be functional in Kedusha? Can we traffic between the realms? Can we make seamless transitions between the realm of the holy, which we're called to go to and get our energy from, and the realm of the mundane and the profane? Well, the thing is that we are, because of the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil and all the things that have happened since the ingestion of that, we are dysfunctional. Our minds don't work the way they should. Our vision is limited in its perspective to just the things right in front of our face, or the things that we have imagined through the frame of reference that our society, our culture, or our ethnicity, or even our family has taught us. So we are dysfunctional in all these factors. We're dysfunctional in our emotional matrix. Our emotions are off the chart. They're out of sync. We have things like anger and rage and fear and paranoia and doubt, and we have jealousy and envy, and we have bitterness, and we have all these things in us that are dysfunctional, that were not the intended emotions we were designed to carry, and we have them out of control. They just control our lives. So we have this dysfunction. Mental, we can't think. Visually, we can't see things beyond right in front of our face. And emotionally, we are basket cases in many times, many situations. We can't keep our shalom. We can't keep our joy. We can't keep our sense of hope, our sense of focus. We get distracted easily. So we have this dysfunction, and it must be dealt with before we can be traffickers between the realms, before we can bring the Kedusha energy of heaven to earth and represent and serve the Holy One the way he deserves to be served. We'll figure out why he deserves to be served and why we would even want to do that before we get through this lesson today. But the dysfunction must be dealt with, and it must be dealt with the Holy One's way. Now, we're going to learn a verb today, a Hebrew verb, and it's kala. It is kuf lamed he. This word kala is going to be translated into English in strange ways. And I'll warn you of that because I think it's part of the mindset of the King James writers and all those who have followed trying to reinterpret after the King James writers. The idea of kala, it's a Hebrew verb. It comes from, initially used in Genesis chapter 2, verse 3, I believe it is, where it says, and the Holy One, in 6 days, the heavens and the earth were created. And on the seventh day he rested, but in 6 days he completed his work of creating that he had done. That word completed is kala in the Hebrew. The Hebrew phrase is actually that he kalad. I'm mixing Hebrew and English, but to get you the idea of the past tense of the third person. And so kalad, he kalad the heavens and the earth. Does that mean he destroyed it? Does that mean he did away with it? No, he made it full and functional. That's what kala means. Actually, when you get down into the noun form of kala, you're going to find that is the word for bride. Once a woman has been betrothed and she has been preparing herself to become a bride, she is deemed to have been kalad. She is a kala. She is the bride. Well, that is the process of being made functional, prepared to function as a wife, in the case of a bride, prepared to function as the people of the living God, in the case of the great nation of Bnei Israel, being prepared to function as disciples and servants of the Holy One. That is our mission. So being kala, this kalaing, don't let yourself get caught up in some of the English translation that says it means to kill, destroy, or terminate. And so that is not what kala means, and they have taken a bias of their mind, it appears. And they have changed the word meaning of the words in some of the story. We must be kalad. We must be prepared for functionality. The third thing is that the kalaing process involves another verb in Hebrew, which is macha, mem, chet, and lamed. Not lamed, but hey, mem, chet, and hey, macha. And this word is usually translated as to blot out, to wipe out. But it's what an artist or an artisan does whenever he has to make some adjustments to his product, what he's working on. Let's say an artist has to kind of cover up something that he did that he wants to change. An artist on a canvas. Let's also consider the possibility of maybe a sculptor. at the potter's wheel, or the potter's potter, and he has to kind of redo something he did first. That's to blot it out, blot what he did, but to make something new. It's not to blot it out forever, it's to make something that is better. So that's machai. There is a level at which the Holy One has to machai us, to blot us out, to reshape us, to redo things with us, to change the way we focus in order to make us fully functional, or to kala us. I know I'm getting off into the Hebrew. I don't want to distract you with that too awful much, but I want you to understand that there is a process going on that is making us a great nation, that is enabling us to carry and distribute and pass out the Kedusha of the Holy One. So, we have some challenges this week. The greatest challenge is hosting the presence, and that's what we're basically called to do. I hope you are caught up in the beauty of that and the honor of that, and yet the kind of the overwhelming nature of that we are called to host the presence of the eternal, invisible, holiest of all spiritual beings. We are called to host the presence of the eternal, invisible, holiest of all spiritual beings. Now that presents some potential challenges to us who live in the mortal flesh, who live amongst a people who we're deployed amongst a people who are corrupt, perverse, fleshly, hyper-emotional, hyper-pseudo-intellectual. Just we have these issues. So the idea of hosting His presence, which is altogether holy, in the midst of a world which is altogether not. Those are the challenges. And once we realize we are called to host His presence at all times, no matter what the circumstances are, what our job is to host His presence and let Him be who He is, and use our body and our minds and our facial expressions and our language and our tongues and our demeanor and our behavior in order to express who He is to the world and tell Him the good news. There is such good news about who He is and what He has in mind for mankind and for creation. Once we realize that our calling is to host the presence, though, the key factor for us is to attain and then to maintain a proper alignment and an atmosphere of cooperation between the eternal spirit that He breathed into us, the neshama that He breathed into Adam, made him a nishmat hayim, a living being that has the essence of the Creator in it. So we have this eternal spirit in us. But alas, the eternal spirit is not all there is. There is also a fallen flesh body. We inhabit a body. This neshama that is eternal inhabits a body that's temporal. It's not going to last forever. We're just temporarily housed in this, assigned to this body. And this body is flesh, and this body has appetites and urges, and it has fear reflexes and anger responses. It has these things, and we also have this thing called a nephesh, will, mind, emotions, all this thing, the network of these factors that is part of our flesh, and we have to deal with the fact that the spirit is always warring against the flesh, always warring against the nephesh, always warring against all the negativity of the world around us. And so we have to get a balance, attain and maintain a proper alignment and cooperation between the neshama, the spirit in us, and the flesh, and the pseudo-intellect, and the nephesh, the animal creature with which we are called to share space with our neshama. So the question that I ask as we get ready to go into Tisa is, how comfortable are you, really? When you think about it, this is a gut check kind of a parsha. It's a sin scenario parsha. It's going to push us to the limits of our sense of, can we even do this job? Can we really host the presence of the Holy One? Here's the question. How comfortable are you really with sharing space and your time and your assets with, and in serving to the death of self level? How comfortable are you with sharing that space with a God you cannot see or truly even understand in your flesh, your nephesh, or your pseudo-intellect? How comfortable are you with that? That's the challenge of faith in the first place, right? In the flesh, in the pseudo-intellect, In the nefesh, what we want to think about and talk about and traffic in and have our conversations about is things that we can taste and things that we can see, things that we can hear, things that we can smell, things that we can touch. And then also things that make us think something brilliant and pseudo-intellectual in our own thinking, or things that make us feel something intense, some fleshly sentiment or sensuality or emotion. That's what we want in our flesh and our pseudo-intellect and our nefesh to do. And we're challenged because the Holy One doesn't approach us that way. He is spirit, and he begins to speak to us in ways that are beyond taste and touch and sight and smell and touch and all those things. So, how comfortable are we with hosting his presence if we can't see him? And if we can't really have the conversation like face to face like a human being does? If we don't see his facial expressions whenever we talk to him? If we don't see his body language and how he reacts, if we can't communicate so easily through nonverbal cues? So that's the question. And how you're handling it? I mean, we can pseudo-intellectually think we have a relationship. We can come up with an idea in our mind that we have a relationship with him. But there's always going to be the question of how we handle some inconvenient matters. There are some inconvenient matters, and one first thing is his invisibility. We just can't see him. We see everybody else. We see real people. We see stuff. We see material things. But we don't see him. And so this idea of his invisibility. Are you comfortable with sharing space with an invisible being? Are you comfortable with laying down your life in service to an invisible being? Second thing is he's incorporeal. He's not like us. He doesn't have bodily shape that is limiting him the way we do. He doesn't have a body that's deteriorating or getting older or maybe too immature because it's too young. He doesn't have warts and blemishes. He doesn't have lust and desire. He doesn't have that. He's incorporeal. Are we comfortable with someone who doesn't have that problem we have? He's not only, are we comfortable with his fact that he's immortal, where he's going to be here when our bodies are gone. When our nefesh, when our mind and will and emotions is not operating anymore. Our neshama will still be alive, but we will not have any form to it other than what he gives us. And so this immortality, eternality, he's of eternal realm. He sees things in the eternal realm. He sees things from the beginning all the way to what we think of as the end. He sees them all the way in between. He knows all. He's omniscient. How are we comfortable with him knowing everything? Before we even have a possibility of finding anything out. Before anything happens, he knows it. Before we meet anybody, he knows what the purpose of that interaction or maybe relationship will be. And he knows how it's going to end if it ends. Well, are we comfortable with that? Are we comfortable with his uncompromising holiness? His dedication to be set apart, to be holy. Does his holiness bother? The fact that you're hosting a holy being, it should kind of make you tremble a little bit because you're going to have a hard time matching that level of holiness. The idea is not to match it. You will never match it. The idea is to get everything else out of the way so that he can be holy. Are you comfortable with his majesty? I mean, we have to behave a certain way in the presence of majesty, with reverence and with awe and with humility. Are you comfortable with his undistractable focus on the greater good and the long-range plan? Because we want to focus on the minutiae. We want to sometimes respond and react to the little things and to the molehills. And he's looking at beyond mountains. He's looking at worlds and realms and ages and generations. Wow. Are we comfortable with the fact that he's thinking differently than we're thinking, seeing differently than we're seeing? Are you comfortable with the fact that he is always in emotional control? He never loses emotional control. He never loses it. He's not like us where we can say, oh yeah, I know how you feel, because we'll never know how he feels. Not really. Because you see, he doesn't overemphasize any one emotion at a given time. He's always focused on the long-term plan. He's always at shalom. He's always at simcha, joy. He's always at tikva, hope. He's always expecting something really good to happen because he's already planned it and strategized it and seen it all the way to the end. Are we comfortable with that? Are we comfortable with the fact that his wisdom and understanding is vastly superior to ours. It's not even close. I mean, it's not even in the same game. His wisdom and understanding is so much higher than ours that we will never tell him what he should do. We will never be able to tell him what he hadn't thought of yet. We will never be able to come up with something unique and novel that he just said, I wish I'd thought of that. It's not going to happen. And we will have this relationship with him nevertheless. Are we comfortable with the fact that he sees everything? We can't hide anything from him. We can't hide behind fig trees. We can't hide behind fig leaves. We can't hide behind anything. Are we comfortable with the fact that he's omnipotent? He can do anything he wishes when he pleases. We can't stop him. Are we comfortable with his omnipresence? The fact that he is everywhere. He is just as much because he's not bound by the physical body we are. Are we comfortable with the fact that wherever we go, he will always be there? And we won't ever be able to get away from it if that's what we wanted to do. Are we comfortable with that? This is why we have humanity problems. I call it humanity's delicate condition, after kind of a takeoff on Papa's Delicate Condition, a movie from back in the 60s, 1960s. Well, the question becomes, as we go into the key Tisa narrative, how do you handle God's, and how amenable are you to God's ways? They're higher than yours. God's words, they're brighter, they're more powerful, they're more energetic, they're more real, they're more pure than yours. God's will, it's better than yours. God's watchfulness, it is never ceasing. And even the last thing I'm going to mention here, something we don't talk about much, but need to understand is part of the game, part of the ball, part of the whole picture. Or how do you handle, how amenable are you to God's wrath? God will be, for the first time in Torah, we are going to read, at least in our English Bibles, that God is angry at human beings. This is Exodus chapter 32 before this happens, 33 before this happens. And nowhere in all the story of the patriarchs, even in the stories of Sodom and Gomorrah, even in the stories of the flood, the tower, Cain and Abel, none of these stories, Adam in the garden, in none of these stories are we suggested to us that the Holy One, the creator of the universe, was angry. Whatever that means in his world, because his emotions are not like our emotions. But we're going to see it said in this parsha that the Holy One was angry. Or his wrath burned, is what it's going to say in English. We'll talk hopefully about the time, the Hebrew words that are underneath it, that are actually are the real words that are being misinterpreted, because we try to interpret everything through our own eyes, through our own experience, and we cannot and have never experienced anything similar to God's anger, if we would think of as anger, or God's wrath. We just don't know what that means or what it looks like. We shouldn't try to interpret it based on our experience with other human beings. So the question is, as we get ready to think about hosting the presence of the Holy One, is do we even really know who he is? Do we know who we're hosting? I mean, we have an idea, we have some experience, we have some relationship, we have some history, but do we really know who he is? And do we really know what he's all about and what he wants to do? You see, we've been rescued from bondage, but we are woefully immature in love and service. That is what he's working on now, to get us mature in love and mature in service. As I said earlier, the only way you get mature in love is to be forgiven much, to be healed of your brokenness in ways that only bring about humility and a desire to serve. And he will give us that opportunity in this parsha. We are so immature in love, we are still full of self-will. We're full of fleshly appetites, urges, and desires. We're full of pseudo-intellectual ideas and opinions and perspectives, and we want everybody else to think like we think. We're people with short attention spans, short memories, and high distractibility indexes. Man, we get distracted at the drop of a hat. That's going to be part of our problem with the whole golden calf incident. We're going to have to be trained by the Holy One, kalad and machad, in order to teach us to overcome all of those things and begin to mature into trustworthy co-regents of his kingdom that reflect his character and nature. He will tell us what his character and nature consists of in this parsha. Well, the Holy One is going to show us things. He's going to defrag our hearts. He's going to reprogram our minds. He's going to refocus our energies. He's going to train us to prioritize what he prioritizes. He's going to show us how he applies a perfect blend of wisdom and compassion, Torah and mercy and love. Now these things have to be balanced. This is part of the nature of his character, his attributes, and we're not skilled in this. We want to go off one end or the other. We want to go off the wisdom, but we kind of short on the compassion. Or we want to go off on the compassion and leave off the wisdom. We want to feel empathy and sympathy and all those sentimental factors. And he says, no, those are only part of the equation. The larger equation requires wisdom and discernment and application of all the insight of heaven and all the emotions of the king that he actually has in the situation. So he's going to teach us to apply a perfect blend of wisdom, compassion, mercy, and judgment to every person, to every circumstance, and to every situation we face. Now that's a lofty goal. We should feel by now a little overwhelmed. Don't fret, don't stress. He is responsible for this, not us. He wants it to happen, and he will cause it to happen. But I will warn you, this is a sinfulness, fallenness reminder partial. We are going to be reminded of the worst moment of our national existence. You know, sometimes we have a bad day. This is the ultimate bad day. Now, the reason he's going to do this is because it's part of the training protocol. He will not react like a child. He will not be an angry suitor. He knew this was going to happen before it ever happened. As a matter of fact, he took Moshe up and kept him up there talking about the Mishkan long enough that the people would do what they're about to do, and Aaron would do what he's about to do. He knew this was going to happen, and it's going to be used. He's going to work all things together, including this, for good, for those who love him, who are called according to his purpose. If you have that, take a deep breath. This is going to be an ugly narrative. Bad things are going to happen, and yet the Holy One is going to turn around and show us how good he is, and how wonderful he is, and how wonderful serving him will be if we will just stay humble and stay trainable, teachable by him. Now, all sin narratives, this sin narrative of the golden calf and all other sin narratives in the Bible are prototypical. They're not just presented so we can feel bad about the people who did the thing or blame them or think at least I'm more spiritual than they are. That's the Pharisees' prayer that we shouldn't do. They're all prototypical. They all tell a story of humanity and the fallen state of humanity. Each of the sin narratives, including the golden calf narrative we read this week, represents an essential component of the universal human experience. An essential component that we need to know about of the universal human experience. Something the Holy One wants us to be aware of, wants us to be on the lookout for, and wants us to be prepared to anticipate, to understand, to face head on, and to deal with effectively and responsibly as kingdom representatives, and not with judgment, not with anger, but with a perfect mix of wisdom and compassion. Now, we have some other sinnings. I just give you a short list of some of the other sin narratives that make this point. The first one, obviously, is the fruit of the tree of knowledge induced avoidance of and denial obsession of the garden. That was the first sin narrative. But think of Cain's not my brother's keeper sin narrative. Think of the same thing happened later, of course, with Joseph and his brothers and their not my brother's keeper idea. Think of the corruption and violence fixation that led to the Great Flood, that narrative. Think of the build a city in a tower fixation that led to the tower scenario. Think of the Sodom and Gomorrah syndrome. I won't go into detail. Think of the Shechem overreaction in the flesh to a bad situation that took place there. Think of the wilderness sins. This is the sin of the golden calf. We'll also, while we're in the wilderness, we're going to have the sin of the spies, the Ham Meraglim, and we're also going to have Korach's rebellion. There will be others, a general sense of complaining and murmuring and flesh obsession, not letting the Spirit control, but letting and regulate our desires and our appetites and build trust, but instead just to react in the flesh. Those are the wilderness sin narratives. And then there's going to be some in the land sin narratives. Achan's treasure, where he hid the gold, or the items that they'd taken. Saul's jealousy narrative, David's lust and murder narrative, a lot of idol worship narratives. These all are prototypical of basic human problems, the humanity's delicate condition. So before we get too detailed, I want to sing. Baruch et Adonai Hamvorach, Baruch Adonai Hamvorach leolam vaed, Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher bachar banu mikol ha'amin, v'natan lanu et toratu. Baruch atah Adonai Noten HaTorah. We bless you, Holy One, our God, who has given us this precious gift of the Torah, called us to be his own out of all the peoples of the earth. Blessed are you, who is the source of all blessings. Tisa is the parsha of prototypical national transgression. Prototypical national transgression, and also of the predictable responses and reactions of, first of all, the Holy One, and second of all, mortal men. Previously on the Great Nation Building Chronicles, we have seen certain things take place. I'm going to summarize it quickly. The reason the creator of the universe cut covenant with Abraham, and the reason he delivered Abraham's seed from bondage, along with a mixed multitude from all the nations of the earth, bondage to the world's elites, the reason he did all that has now been revealed. The plan is that he wants to restore fellowship with, and abide with, and commune intimately with, and co-labor with humankind in a grand redemptive scheme. And in order to facilitate this, lately he has been telling us he wants Abraham's seeds to build him a beachhead landing strip headquarters building, a headquarters location, some set apart earth space where he can abide in the midst of his redeemed nation and display his beauty and his majesty, his goodness and his goodwill, and his great vision for the world, for all nations to see, where he can receive supplicants and receive seekers and receive sinners and immerse all of them in a life and circumstancing changing level of Kedusha energy, because the holy, the heavenly, is coming to earth in the tabernacle, in this meeting place, in this set apart earth space. And finally, we've been talking about to hold regular meetings and briefings for continued advancement of his kingdom plan. That's what he wants. That's where we've been previously on the Great Nation Building Chronicles. The general outline for Tisa is that the Mishkan Discourse, the tent maker's dream download that we've been talking about, is about to conclude. Something has to happen before we build what he has described and he indwells in. Something has to happen that's going to prepare us to do this humbly, cooperatively instead of competitively, and with some sense of urgency. And what's going to happen is the calf sin. So the first thing, of the 6 portions of this parsha, the first thing we get is the final 7 subparts of the Mishkan Discourse / Tent Maker's Dream download. He's going to give us 7 more things that are supposed to whet our appetites for having him indwell his nation and be here to receive visitors and have this beautiful place of Kedusha energy downloads. The first 7 parts, that's the first section. The second section is the calf sin narrative itself, and that will be in chapters 32, basically. And then we get into a season of dealing with that. After the calf sin, things happen. Bad stuff happens. It gets really ugly. And we have a season when we have to kind of heal. And post-traumatic stress disorder may be what you would call it. I don't know what you really want to call it, but it is a season of coming back to our senses, getting our feet back under us, our land legs, so to speak, back under us, and making teshuvah and starting over. That was the whole idea. This was never going to be the end. This was always understood. Before he ever called Abram, he knew this sin was going to take place. So he's not going to overreact to it as Moshe may think he's going to do. And the writers of the King James Version may be trying to make it look like he's going to do. He's not going to change his mind suddenly after all he's been doing for all these years. He's not like that. He's an omnipotent, all-wise God. So he's bringing us to a place of humility. He's bringing us to a place where we understand our unworthiness and the impossibility of us ever being meritorious enough to host his presence and release his Kedusha in the world. And how are we going to start over then? That's the problem. Then he's going to use that situation where we are at our point of brokenness, of humility, our point of willingness to listen to what he has to say, to put Moshe in the cleft of the rock. We're actually all going to be there with him in a way. And he's going to, because the text is going to tell us the story. He's going to put us in the cleft of the rock. His great hand is going to be covering us. Yes, we will be covered. Yes, there will be a great covering, a great kippur. His hand will be over us, the shadow of his hand, and then he will reveal his nature, who he really is. Not just what his words and instructions may be, not just what his wisdom looks like, but who he is. And that is where the holiness really resides. That is where the power resides, in the character, in the nature of who he is. He will give the great midot reveal. He will reveal his 13 highest and best, most important attributes. And that is what will take place in chapter 34. And then Moshe's second coming, I call it. There's so many second coming themes in the Torah to prepare you for the Mashiach. But nevertheless, the second coming of Moshe, this is when he comes down the mountain this time, and he's not throwing things, and he's not angry, and his face is shining, even though the same people with the same problems are there. Hopefully not the same sin, but the same people with the same mess are there. He is going to come down with his face aglow, with him radiating the Kedusha energy this time on the second coming of Moshe. That's our general outline for the parsha. Okay, so we are learning how to soar in the heavenlies through the Kedusha, the Mishkan Discourse. The Kedusha Discourse is in the book of Leviticus. We'll get to that. That's the longest of discourse of the Torah. But the Mishkan Discourse has been teaching us how we can soar in the heavenlies, be seated with Messiah in the heavenlies, be there with the 24 elders and the 4 living creatures and the cherubim and the seraphim, and see the holy things and sense the Kedusha and the beauty and the majesty of our King. We're teaching. He's teaching us how to do this. And also, while we're there, to learn from the Kohanim, the priest, how to commune intimately with the Holy One, how to lay down what needs to be laid down, pick up what needs to be picked up, preparing ourselves for this life. That's what we've been doing. But once we get there, we have to learn how to, I call it stick the landing, like I talked about at the end with Moshe. And Moshe's first time down the mountain, after he came down from the holy realm, from the realm of seeing this great unveiling of the heavenly courts and chambers, his first landing was a disaster. He got angry, he got furious, his rage was what was running, and he threw down, he broke the most precious gift the Holy One could give man, at that time, the 2 tablets that has his own handwriting on it. Can you imagine the handwriting of the creator of the universe? With his messages of love and direction? I don't want to get too deep in it, but he broke this precious gift, threw it down in anger, like when people get mad and they throw things. And then he screamed and yelled and forced them to drink a concoction of the dust of the golden calf. And then he said some crazy things about strapping your sword on your thigh. Those who are on God's side, strap your sword on your thigh and go through the camp from one side to the other, from entrance to entrance, and start just striking everybody his own brother, everybody his own companion, everybody his own friend. Oh my heaven, that's going to be everybody in the camp. There's going to be one man left standing if that's completely followed. So he's going to do all that stuff. So he didn't stick the landing the first time. The question is, how are we learning from Moshe's example, hopefully, what not to do? How are we going to be at sticking the landing when we return from our communion with the Holy One in the holy places? Can we faithfully and responsibly steward what we receive in the heavenlies? And when we come back, can we keep our shalom and return to the mundane affairs and irritations and perversions of ordinary life on earth without wreaking havoc and without putting forth some stench in the world, as the way we're going to see here? It is the week for bad stuff to happen and us to see the worst in ourselves and in others. So don't curl up your lip in judgmentalism. Resist the temptation to turn up your nose in pious disgust. Don't assume for a second that you or your chosen group of self-proclaimed Torah-observant or spiritual folk are one whit better or holier or more righteous or more dedicated or loyal to God or more faithful to the covenant than the people of the Sinai generation. We're not. We have the same problem they did. We have the same issue, and that's why the narrative is put in the Torah in the first place, so we can read it every year and be shocked that this is part of our mess as well as theirs. The focus of the calf sin narrative is not on the ugliness of the sin that was committed, much less on the flawed behavior of the sinners or Moshe. The focus of Torah's narrative is on the ramifications and ill effects of sin, first of all. Do we understand what happens when we sin, when we breach the covenant, when we walk away from the plan and the will and the ways of the Holy One, when we choose our own way, we follow our own desires, we do what's right in our own eyes? Do we understand the ramifications? Who gets hurt? And how bad it spreads all the way through our family, our household, our children, our spouses, our beloved, our friends, into our workplace, our business. Everything is affected by these choices we make to leave the pathway of the holy way, things of God. Well, the focus of Torah is upon, first of all, teaching us that. And secondly, upon teaching us protocols of awakening to conviction, responding to conviction, responding to the sinful nature of who we are, and making effective teshuvah, doing effective things to bring ourselves back in alignment with the will of the Holy One, and back to Him as a person, as a persona, as a righteous, holy God, as our King. Come back to that relationship as our bridegroom, as a matter of fact, to come back in that regard. That's making teshuvah. This is so much beyond repentance in the English concept. Repentance is being sorry for what you did and saying, I'm not going to do it again, and then trying in your own strength to do that. Teshuvah is something totally different. It's coming back to the Holy One, back into His presence, back to be healed, back to restored, and then walking in His power outward. This focus of the Torah on this calf sin episode is about accepting and walking in forgiveness. Forgiveness. You cannot take the forgiveness message out of the Torah. You cannot take it out of the Bible. You cannot take it out of your life. This is so critical. We have a God who knows how to strategically, powerfully, beyond imagination levels of forgiveness and mercy. And that is the strongest thing He does. More than His force, more than what He did to Pharaoh, more than what He did to Sodom and Gomorrah, where He is strongest is in His mercy and forgiveness attributes. And then He's going to be focusing us not on how bad things were and who did what wrong, but on getting up off the mat when the time comes and getting back to work in the grand plan of redemption of mankind and of restoration for creation. So we have to think up ahead of what will Moshe find when he descends. He starts the parsha up in the heavenly realms, up at the very top of the mountain, inside the glory cloud, having his download of the beauty realm things. But when he descends, what will he find in the real world? And how will he react to what he sees? This time it will not be good. We'll ask the question, do you think he's going to walk in kingdom shalom? Do you think he should? Yeah, well, this is a lesson he's going to have to learn, and we all have to learn. Will he walk in kingdom shalom even though he goes down to a perverse world, or will he give way to the fleshly outrage, disgust, anger, fear, reaction levels? Will he stay focused on the plan of redemption for mankind and the long-term vision, or will he give way to blame and frustration over what's going on in the moment? And will he pursue the way of vengeance, which is not man's to pursue? What will be the cost of shalom shedding? Because he is going to shed shalom. I say that word, that phrase. It's not a word you probably hear in many places. But I sense that in my life, my biggest problem is I shed shalom too easily. I give it up for a penny's worth of anger, a penny's worth of anxiety. Any little thing that I allow to take my shalom away from me, the most precious gift the Holy One has ever given, that's shalom shedding. And what will be the cost? What is the cost in your home of shalom shedding? What is the cost in your business? What is the cost in your life? What is the cost in your health of shalom shedding? Well, it's great. And who bears the brunt of that cost? It's really not you, although you bear a serious part of it. It's really your children if you have them, parents if you have them. It's really your friends, it's your neighbors, it's your spouse. It's really the people that mean the most to you, that you most care about. Those are the ones who suffer the biggest wound of the shalom shedding. You can fix yours, but they have to fix theirs. And you can't do it. So the next question is, the real question of the parsha is, how is the Holy One going to pull off the miracle of the ages, which is to cause this mess that's going to be created, this mess that Moshe is going to step right into and get all over himself and turn angry? How is the Holy One going to do the greatest miracle of the ages and make it part of the great all things work together suit that he does, and make it good, make it come out to be good for those who love him, who are called according to his purpose? As part of this parsha, we're going to learn that the Holy One has something I call our King's most excellent wrath. It is referred to, the Hebrew word is af, aleph, fesafit. Af. We translate it into English, or the King James Version did, as wrath. And so we're used to that familiar term, and we sometimes like to talk about it if we're talking about how it's going to affect somebody else. I hesitate when I hear people wanting to talk about the wrath all the time, because that tells me that they're really judgmental and critical and they want it to happen to somebody else. Very seldom do we talk about it with regard to ourselves. But here's the issue. Af is not really very well translated as wrath. Af is the flaring of the nostrils. It is the increase of the energy. It is the speeding up of the electrons, you would think, in a mass or an element of something like that. It is to increase the heat. And there we get into it, because it's af hara. Hara is heat. It is energy. So the idea of is when the Holy One is preparing to act in some way, is preparing to deal with a situation, what happens is it's like, if you can imagine, the heating up of the electrons. It's heat. That's what Moshe is really talking about, and the Holy One's really talking about is, my heat is increasing. It's not that I'm angry like a human being. It's not that I'm having a fit. It's not that I'm changing my mind. It's not that I'm changing my game plan. Not that I was shocked or surprised by what you did. It is the fact that this requires intervention, and I am preparing to energize myself to act. Okay, that's his wrath. I'm glad we have his af. His af is the seal that he will not sit by and let the creation run its course and die. He has a plan, and he will always intervene at the right way and the right time to bring about the appropriate response. Okay, bring the heat, you might say. The end of Parsha Yitro, as we start this Parsha of Tisa, the end of the Parsha Yitro says, the Holy One said to Moshe, this is what you are to say to Bnei Israel. You've seen that I have talked with you from heaven. Wow, that's pretty good. You are not to make anything to be with me, no gods of silver or gods of gold. You must not make those things for yourself. What you are to make is a mizbech adamah, an altar of earth. That you are to make for me. And you are to zabak it on your olaot and your shlamim, your presentations, your approach surrogates. Every place where I record my Shem, my character, my attributes, my name, I will come to you and I will bless you. This is his promise from Yitro. And if you will make me a mizbech avanim, a rock, a stone, altar, don't make it of hewn stone. If you use a tool on it, you'll profane it. All right, I want to move on a little bit. The idea now of the outline. The calf sin narrative in particular. I will kind of skip over and let you read for yourself the 7 final subparts of the Mishkan Discourse that's found in chapter 30, verse 11 and following. all the way through, I guess, verse 18. There's more than that, 31:18, about a chapter's worth of 7 final things. And it ends with the entrustment of a set of tablets. One of the things that we're going to take into the earthly realm, from the holy realm, that'll be part of the Mishkan, actually be the center of gravity of the Mishkan, is supposed to be a set of tablets of sapphire stone, beautiful sapphire stone, that have the very inscription by the finger of God of his instructions of how man should live life and how to bring about the will of God in this world. Precious, precious, precious. That's the end of the Mishkan Discourse. He says, now turn, your people have corrected themselves. And so what's going to happen is he tells Moshe that your people, the people you brought out of Egypt, and it's interesting how he says that, have corrupted themselves. Go down and then deal with it. And at one point he says, now leave me alone. In other words, go. I need to be here. I'm going to do something. Leave me alone. And my af will be hot. That doesn't mean he's in a raging fit. That doesn't mean he's angry like human beings get angry. It doesn't mean he is changing all of his plans to fit this narrative because he just didn't foresee this one coming. Not at all. He's not surprised. He's not shocked. He knew this was going to happen from the very beginning, before he ever called Abram, before he went through the whole scenario with Pharaoh, before he called Moshe. He knew this. This is not a shock to him. What he's doing is not changing his game plan. What he's doing is preparing to intervene. He says, let me kala them. And I think in the English Bible it says consume them. Oh my heavens. You remember kala? Kalas? And this seventh day, on 6 days he completed all the work, kalad, all the work they did. That's what he's going to do. Let me kalad them. Let me finish the work. Let me get that functional. Prepare them to be functional in this. Let me do this. And Moshe is misunderstanding, and Moshe is reacting, and he's interceding on things that is like, you really wanted to tell me this? He reminds me, this scenario reminds me of Abraham in chapter 18 of Genesis, whenever the 3 visitors come and the Holy One's in the midst of this process, and Avram all of a sudden wants to tell the Holy One what he should do, and the Holy One is just, he knows the answer before Avram speaks, and he knows that Avram doesn't even have a clue what he's talking about. Same is here with Moshe. Moshe doesn't have a clue what the Holy One's planning on doing, but he projects his own emotion or what he might feel onto the Holy One. So we have that, the calf sin narrative. Then Moshe goes down. Before Moshe goes down the hill, there's a very powerful word. The Holy One, it says, comforted himself, and not calmed himself. He and it says, I think in King James Version, he relented. He changed. He was not going to do what Moshe thought he was going to do. He was cool. He was copacetic. His shalom was there. And Moshe turns and goes down with the King of Glory's shalom in place. And as he walks down the hill, and he hears the sound of the reveling with the golden calf, and he senses that something's going on, and he sees, and he gets down further, and he sees what's going on. Moshe is not keeping his shalom. He's not in the shalom character where the Holy One left off, and he is going to get off all into his flesh. His emotions are going to go crazy. He's not going to stick this landing. He's not going to be able to take the Kedusha and the holiness and the shalom of the holy realm that he's been in down into earth. He's instead going to do something. He starts raging, ranting. He starts throwing things. He throws, of all things, the precious gift that's supposed to be the center point of all communion between the Holy One and humanity, the center of gravity of the Mishkan and of the nation and of the beachhead of the kingdom of heaven on the earth. He's going to take this most precious gift, and he's going to, go back and look and see if it says throw that down and break it because of what they've done. He just got angry and did it. And then he's going to call Aaron on the carpet, and Aaron had some stuff coming. But he calls Aaron on the carpet, he does all sorts of things, and the next thing he says is he calls the sons of whoever will be on his side, he says. On God's side, he says. And put on every man his sword, strap it onto his thigh, go through the camp wielding that sword, striking and killing, destroy every man his brother, every man his neighbor, every man his companion, his fellow. Everybody in the camp, basically. That's Moshe. That's not a word from the Holy One. That's Moshe's instruction. And that means he's not even touching it on the basis of who did what wrong, who formulated the calf. They don't hit Aaron. who came up with the idea for the calf. They just indiscriminate massacre. It's Holocaust seed is done to the camp. That's not sticking the landing. That's causing all sorts of grief. And I think many times when we try to judge other people and we try to be reactive to what is going on in the world and what sins people are committing, that's what we do. We come in like Moshe raging. It's the same thing he did whenever he saw the Egyptian mistreating a Hebrew. He went vigilante. He went vengeance. And he killed him. And that presented all sorts of problems for everybody in the process. Now, that will happen, and then we have to go through a season of healing, of recovery. And I call the season Ish Petok Aholo, every man at the entrance to his own tent. After a great sin scenario has taken place in the community, you can expect there will be people going back to their own tents and healing, trying to heal. They don't want communion. They don't want fellowship for a while. They need to get alone. And that's what happens with Ish Petok Aholo, every man at the entrance of his own tent. And finally, there's a period of recovery, and Moshe begins to take his tent outside the camp, and he sets it up, and he meets with the Holy One out there. And then as he goes out of the tent, and as the Holy One meets with him inside the tent, the people, every man stands at the entrance of his tent with his family, worshiping the Holy One. And now we're getting back to the place where we're ready to come back into his presence and learn who he is. And then we have the great heart-to-heart, I call it, when the Holy One takes Moshe up into the cleft of the rock, and he proclaims over him his beautiful characteristics, who he really is. Because it's not just about what he says we're supposed to do and not do. It is about who he is and what kind of message we have for the world about who he is and what he wants to do. So the first thing he says is, Yotevave, Yotevave. I'm not going to pronounce it for you. Yotevave El, the God, and he says merciful. His first characteristic is presence. His second characteristic is mercy. That and compassion and faithfulness to covenant and willingness to come back and visit. I mean, we think this visitation is like some sort of punishment. It's not to punish. That your English Bibles will tell you stuff like that. That's not in the Hebrew. Look in the Hebrew. In the Hebrew, he says he's going to visit generation after generation. It's a checkup. It's a muster. It's an assembly. It's an inspection to see if that seed if that wound has been healed, if that seed has been rooted out, if the tears have been gone, and there's been a healing take place, or if there needs to be another intervention. Well, that kind of understanding of who the Messiah is, who Yotevave is, should color everything we do. It should empower everything we do. We will realize he is wonderful. He is worthy. He is worth everything. He is worth our service. He is worth our time. He is worth our love. He is worth our death if necessary. And therefore we can go with humility into the world with our face shining with the glory of God. Not with the judgment, not with the anger, not with the wrath, but with his love, his compassion, his mercy, and his wisdom. Amen. Shabbat shalom. See you next week.